Good afternoon, everyone. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this town hall meeting about the Mapping the Humanities project. I'm Jo Fox. I'm Dean of the School of Advanced Study, which has been running this project commissioned by the AHRC and Research England. Well, the purpose of today is to share with you why we decided to undertake the project, the benefits it will bring, to show you some of the initial designs and how data will be presented, and most importantly of all, how you can get involved. There'll be some time for questions, so please do start sending your questions through the Q&A function as we move through the session. And I'm now going to pass over to Dr. Kathy Kerfoot, Associate Director for Major Programmes at the AHRC. Kathy.
Thanks, Jo, and welcome everybody. I'm just joining this morning, I think, to give a little bit of background context to this piece of work and why we're working with SAS to do it. So the context, from my perspective, starts about 5 years ago, which is roughly when UKRI was created, and I'd just joined AHRC actually. Work started on something called an infrastructure roadmap, which was a project that looked to set out existing research infrastructure in the UK and think about long-term planning for how we supported it. And I remember at the time there was quite a lot of anxiety in the Arts and Humanities Research Council in particular about how we might be represented in a piece of work like that, and whether it would speak to the research that we did, or whether it would be about flashy labs and giant telescopes and the kind of classic bits of STEM kit that you usually see. To cut a long story very short, over the last sort of 5 years, brilliant colleagues at the council have really navigated that process and made space for the arts and humanities in those discussions. The project has evolved to be pretty well inclusive of the arts and humanities and has given us access to new pots of funding and new resources that we've been able to send to institutions that have their own collections, and also to build some major programmes. So we're now looking at launching an £80 million investment in infrastructure for conservation and heritage science, as well as 75 million on creative facility for UK screen, gaming and performance. So we've had an enormous amount of success, and really the world has sort of moved on for us quite significantly as far as infrastructure goes. But I'm not sure if we still yet fully understand what that term means for our community, and what it means really beyond the kind of big bits of kit that you might bid in to UKRI for. And it was those sorts of conversations that really prompted this initial piece of work. It's actually, what's the bigger picture for the arts and humanities? What are the facilities, but also the centres, the people, the networks that are out there that can underpin all the brilliant work that happens across the UK? So this is what the Mapping Humanities project is all about, and what SAS colleagues will now tell you more about in detail. So I'll hand back to Jo, but just to say an enormous thank you to SAS for taking it on, and for wrestling with all the complexities of the project, and also to Research England, who are supporting this work with us. We really appreciate them teaming up with us to navigate this kind of tricky space. So thank you, Jo. I'll hand over back to you.
Thanks, Kathy. So I think that it's clear that having access to a map of arts and humanities research infrastructure is more important now than ever. We're all fairly clear, as Kathy has said, what we mean by STEM infrastructure, but we're less clear what arts and humanities research infrastructure is beyond our libraries and archives, and less clear still as to what might be needed in the future to sustain a healthy and vibrant research ecosystem. We already have significant humanities research infrastructure in the UK, but much of this remains invisible, undiscoverable, and unconnected. It's invisible to funders, to policymakers, and quite often even to researchers themselves. So this interactive online open access map is a first step to identifying what we have, making it more visible and discoverable to ourselves and to others, and then to use the information that we've gathered to plan for the future. So what are the key benefits? Well, we'll have a better and more holistic understanding of existing arts and humanities-based research infrastructure in the UK, and we'll get a sense of what constitutes humanities research infrastructure, at present ill-defined and frequently misunderstood. We'll have a better understanding of the contribution of institutes, centres and networks to that complex and diverse arts and humanities research landscape, and greater visibility for these really critical elements of our research ecosystem. The map itself creates a useful and meaningful research resource that will support complex analysis and will allow us to answer the questions humanities organisations and researchers want to ask about our environment. So it's not just a search and find tool, it does so much more than that. We'll have for the first time a systematic means of identifying existing strengths that might be nurtured, but also to assess gaps in our provision. And that includes any research cold spots for investment. That might be places, that might be certain kinds of infrastructure, that might be themes, things that we think will be important, but not yet provided for. And that will help us to identify where further infrastructural support might be needed. And connected to that, we'll be able to identify the types of physical and virtual infrastructural support that will be beneficial to research. For example, making that infrastructure visible in ways that enable research that would not otherwise be possible, by facilitating connections between researchers and institutions where capacity or infrastructure may be limited, or even by enabling institutions to explore possibilities for combining those research infrastructure for greater impact and reach. In a practical sense, researchers will be able to more easily identify potential collaborators for research projects and initiatives beyond their immediate networks and beyond their disciplines too. So we are hoping that new possibilities will open up for increased collaboration across activities, projects, initiatives and sectors, bringing opportunities to make all of these things more than the sum of their parts. And finally, and I think critically, we'll be able to better articulate how arts and humanities research infrastructure benefits the HE sector as a whole, how it brings wider societal benefit, and also how it brings a return on investment to funders. Over time, we'll be able to monitor the health of and trends in UK humanities research infrastructure. So watching the project come together has been so incredibly exciting, and we've seen the possibilities of this map come into sharper focus as we've gone along. And I'm now going to hand over to Professor Jane Winters and Dr. Megan Bushell to present the initial site design and a data demonstration. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Jo. Hello, everyone. As Jo said, it's been a great pleasure to see this project take shape over the last few months. It's been based in the Digital Humanities Research Hub at the School of Advanced Study, and my colleague Megan Bushnell is leading the data team and is going to be talking through some of the data collection processes and also giving you a sneak preview of the website and some of the data visualizations. We're heading towards a full launch of the site in November, but we hope that it'll be ready in a beta version for people to start checking data and so on. But Megan will explain more about this. Over to you, Megan.
Thank you so much, Jane, and thank you all for joining us today, sharing your time and attention with us. So as Jane kind of laid out, today I just want to kind of walk you through our processes for collecting data about infrastructure for the Mapping the Arts and Humanities project. I'll also explain the digital resource that we're planning to create and how it can benefit you. And I'll give you a sneak preview of what it all should look like. So let's get started. First, we'll handle the data collection processes. And I think the first question we have to answer here, which Jo and Kathy already alluded to, is what do we mean by infrastructure? Because it's not immediately obvious what arts and humanities research infrastructure entails. Infrastructure generally refers to structures necessary to support and enable research. And it can include things like libraries, museums, archives, repositories, and datasets. However, for the arts and humanities, at its core, we feel the necessary unit for research is people, really. So for this project, we've interpreted infrastructure as collaborative structures. i.e. research institutes, centers, groups, learned societies, and independent research organizations. We would like to expand this definition to include other things, such as, libraries, museums, archives, things I mentioned before. But for now, we really want to prioritize collecting these collaborative kinds of structures, because as far as we're aware, they've not been cataloged before. And we're a bit limited in what we're able to achieve in this first initial phase of the project, since we want to have the resource launched in November. So a follow-up question that we need to answer is, of course, what do we mean by the arts and humanities? Since this is a project commissioned by the AHRC, we're guided by their remit and their subject classifications. And these include subjects that you would expect, like history, classics, languages and literature, and visual arts. However, it also includes subjects that are also covered by the ESRC in some capacity, such as political science, development studies, and law, especially things like criminology, those kinds of things. We also find sometimes some overlap with STEM subjects in the realm of design, because we find that, design is a big part of a kind of engineering, sometimes developing medical technology, all of that kind of thing. So it can sometimes be a much kind of wider net than you would necessarily think. So our approach has therefore tended to be as inclusive as possible, because we want to find the things that people normally do not see, especially when it comes to interdisciplinary activity based in the arts and humanities. So our data collection process has generally 4 phases. So we've started by manually combing through university websites to identify relevant infrastructure per the definitions I've just given you. And once this infrastructure has been identified, we've gone onto their web pages and collected information directly from there. This is where we currently are in our data collection process. And so far, we've collected over 3,000 pieces of infrastructure. In terms of what we collect, we only collect publicly available information at this stage, which we are then planning to kind of send to you for verification. We're aiming to have our initial data collection and also web design phase, which we're kind of doing at the same time. We're hoping to have both of those completed by November, when we'll launch the site and publish the data set. However, before we publish anything, we will be getting in touch with all identified infrastructure to verify the data we've collected and obtain permission to publish the data. No infrastructure's data will be published without first giving the infrastructure the option to opt out. And you will always have the option to opt out of the data set, even at a later date. So as part of this kind of verification process, identified data owners will also be encouraged to register a user account with the website that we are developing, so that they will be able to update their data whenever they choose. And this will ensure that our data set remains accurate. Any personal data that you share with the project as part of user registration will not be shared with anyone else and will only be kept by the project to maintain user accounts. And again, if you should ever wish to delete your user account, that is absolutely fine, and the project will immediately delete your personal data as well. We've been working really hard to make sure that we comply with GDPR standards, and we've been working with the University of London's data protection team. Though we're always very happy to, if you want to know more about processes, we're always really happy to discuss them further with you. In terms of what we collect, again, everything we collect at the moment is already been made publicly available. We record the infrastructure's name and its description straight from its about page or home page. We record the website URL, a contact email and address, a university affiliation if the infrastructure is based at a university, a parent organization if the infrastructure is nested inside of another infrastructure, the date, description, and source of its most recent activity that we can find, just so that's largely for our own purposes, so we can kind of gauge how active the infrastructure is and how accurate the information may be. We also record any research partners that we find that are also infrastructure, and any infrastructure funding sources. Those are sources that fund the infrastructure as a whole. We're not necessarily looking for project funding sources. So these are the core data fields that we try to populate. If the information is available, we also collect the founding year of the infrastructure and its social media handles. So again, all of this is public. It's mostly from the infrastructure's main webpage, though sometimes we also look at university websites if they have a secondary page on a university website. We sometimes look at university blogs. We'll also look at the Gateway to Research portal or the Charity Commission if it's relevant. But we record all the sources that we've consulted for every record. And when we contact you to verify your data, we will also list where we got the data from. Of course, a lot of this data is bound to be out of date. That's just kind of the nature of university websites from time to time, which is why the verification step in our data collection process is really so important. So in addition to all of this information that we collect, we also assign various subject tags to every infrastructure to basically help users once the dataset has gone live on the website. It's to help the users find what they are looking for. So this tagging system is designed to be responsive and accurate, and it consists of sort of three main sets. The first set is made up of AHRC's funding categories, which include things like archaeology, classics, cultural museum studies, and so on. These will be primarily used kind of on the data entry side of things. Then the second set are project-created tags, which introduce new tags to capture current research trends, such as digital humanities, environmental humanities, medical humanities, and so on. These will kind of be combined with a flattened version of the AHRC tags, because the AHRC tags currently have a bit of a hierarchy that makes them a bit restrictive to use sometimes. We're going to combine our tags with the AHRC ones without the hierarchy to create subject filters on the website. And these should hopefully be a bit more flexible than the previous system. The third set of tags are user tags, which users will be able to create for themselves when they verify their data so that they can describe their infrastructure using the most appropriate language. These again will be very, very flexible. We want you to be able to use the language that you feel is most appropriate for your infrastructure. We don't want to prescribe meanings to things. We don't want to stick things in boxes. We really want to be able to represent things as they largely are. And these tags are going to be used as keywords to assist in the keyword search. And we're going to be doing a regular data check to see which tags have been created. And if we find that there are specific user tags that are especially productive, we will then promote them up into project tags so that we have a kind of language system that is responsive and is responding to changes in the field. And ultimately, what we're hoping is the work that we are doing with this tagging system and the tags that come out of it, we're hoping that that can potentially contribute towards maybe a new set of AHRC categories. Anyway, that is the data side. Now let's do the fun stuff where I'll just give you a sneak preview of the website's designs and walk you through some of the things that you should hopefully be able to do on this website. So this is our current design for the homepage of the website. It has been designed to prioritize accessibility, reliability, usability, and legibility. So the page is relatively lightweight, which means it should run reliably, even for people who maybe don't have access to the best broadband. It's been designed to be very readable, with a high contrast between the text and the background, but still attractive. And really, it's designed to get you into the data with as few obstructions as possible. So as you can see, the first thing you can do on this website is immediately do a keyword search to find an infrastructure. Alternatively, you can explore a map of UK infrastructure, depending on how you prefer to search. This is a prototype made in Power BI of what this map function could look like. At the moment, in this prototype, the infrastructure are mapped by postcodes. So you tend to have multiple infrastructures kind of piled on top of one another in these kind of blue bubbles of activity. However, on the actual map, we're planning to geocode street addresses for more accurate mapping. And as you zoom in on the page, these kind of bubbles of activity will separate, and then you'll get kind of the individual infrastructures all standing out. But also, if you click on one of the bubbles and highlight it, you should be able to see what infrastructures are in that area. This is the map search, but on the main search, you should also be able to filter your results by subject, university affiliation, and location. And using this search function and the map search as well, you'll hopefully be able to learn a lot more about what's going on in your field and find new research partners. Hopefully find things that you would expect to find, otherwise our tagging system is not working as it should. But we're also hoping that you'll be able to find things that are new to you. Find things maybe that you didn't expect, maybe find things that are local to you that you didn't know existed, or find really relevant partners that are maybe across the country to kind of help unify the arts and humanities research within the entirety of the UK. For students and early career researchers, we're also planning on implementing a search feature to indicate which infrastructures are offering various funding opportunities, such as fellowships and bursaries or prizes, which will hopefully help these people plan the next stages of their career. I've personally found that often these kinds of career opportunities are only available to those who are kind of already aware of them through their personal networks. So this will hopefully make the whole sector more accessible for everyone. Returning to the homepage, if you scroll further down, we have a section that provides a brief overview of the project, which will lead to the About page with even more information about our work. But then we also have links to the project dashboard and the API. Now, the dashboard is designed to provide lightweight visualizations that can give the casual user insight into the data set. And these are really designed, these aren't meant to be absolutely comprehensive. They're really designed to answer some of the core questions regarding our data and really get you asking even more questions about the data and get you interested in exploring what we have recorded. So we're still designing this dashboard, but this is one kind of sample visualization that might be on there. This one is answering the question, what subjects are represented by the arts and humanities? And this pie chart then gives a breakdown of the distribution of the broad AHRC subject categories within this data set as it currently stands. So you can see how well represented your discipline is. And who knows, maybe you'll find that there's more there than you expected, and then maybe you'll want to go and explore the data set to see, oh, what else is in there? There seems a lot more than I thought there would be. Another potential visualization is this timeline. This one kind of answers the question, when did these infrastructure first appear? It tracks when infrastructure in our dataset were founded and potentially gives you some general insights into trends in the sector. Of course, for this one, not every infrastructure provides their founding year publicly on their website, so we don't have a complete dataset for that. But we really hope that when we contact you to verify your data, that you'll be willing to kind of provide us with that information to make this visualization kind of stronger, so that we can find more uses for it, hopefully draw some firmer conclusions. Now, again, this dashboard is really only meant to provide general insights into the data set to kind of springboard users into exploring the data themselves. For researchers who want to further analyze the data and build their own visualizations, we are building an API. So the data that's available on the website is presented in a way that's optimized for searching, but not necessarily for analyzing the data on a large scale. Not all of the data is going to be visible online, mostly because not all of it's going to be relevant for the casual searcher. However, it will all be available via the API or by CSV download. And the API will enable large-scale analysis of the data and then creation of more high-functioning complex visualizations. And these will hopefully help us develop a more comprehensive understanding of how the sector is currently structured, which will help us kind of answer some of those questions that Joe was raising at the beginning of this webinar. So here's an example of something that you can build with the API. This is a screenshot of just a small section of what's now a very large network graph, which maps out the parent-child and partner relationships between infrastructures and universities. This was created in Neo4j, which is also capable of running statistical analyses on this graph to gain insights about how relationships between infrastructure behave. The data team is working on developing more visualizations like this that can be created using the API. And we are planning to provide scripts and tutorials and instructions to enable the community to make and use these visualizations, and hopefully then inspire them to create their own. So some of the other things that we're currently working on is we're working on variations of this kind of network graph that aggregate the data by type of infrastructure and subject of study. So we can see what types of infrastructure tend to work together and what disciplines tend to collaborate together as well. We're also really excited about creating a network graph that's geospatially representative, so we can see which areas of the country tend to work together. And we're also looking to create various map variations, like a time-lapse map, perhaps, that will show the development of infrastructure across the UK over time. So going back to the home page, at the very bottom, there's going to be a banner inviting users to get involved. And this is perhaps kind of the most important point. Our data collection at the moment is manual, so there are going to be things we've missed. We've collected a lot of stuff. I mean, I don't think anyone really expected us to find over 3,000 things, but there is more. It's just really proven to us that there's so much more out there, and there are bound to be things that we completely missed. So in these cases, we strongly encourage the community to join the project and to submit their infrastructure and to put themselves on the map, as it were. And not only will this help strengthen our data set, but we hope it will really benefit the infrastructure in question themselves. So as part of this kind of web database, every infrastructure that is included on our data set will be given its own detail page with its name, description, funding opportunities, history, contact details, URL, and a nice map. And the idea is kind of to move users from our web resource onto the infrastructure's own website so that they can find further information, or at least to provide a really easy means for people to find these infrastructures and then contact them directly. In this way, we're really hoping that infrastructures who participate in the project will gain more visibility and improve their accessibility. Moreover, because we'll give infrastructure the option to have direct access to their data to update or remove any content that they deem appropriate, we'll essentially be providing infrastructures with a web presence that they control, which for some smaller scale infrastructure is something that they might not necessarily have. I've often heard stories about, some infrastructure don't have access to their own website, or in some cases, they're part of a very, very large university website that they really don't have much input over. They might have a small page in it, but they're not really given the option to update it themselves. In this way, we're really hoping to help enable infrastructure to expand their membership and remit and find new partners to really help arts and humanities research infrastructure flourish. So that's the project in a nutshell from the data and web development perspectives. And we really hope you're as excited about as we are, and that it proves to be a valuable resource for the sector. As was mentioned before, phase 1 of this project is due to finish at the end of this year. So you can really look forward to hearing more from us in the next coming months on our progress with this. However, we do have some tentative plans to hopefully enrich this data set and continue working on this project past 2023. So using the API that we are developing, we have ambitions to link our data set to other existing mapping projects in the sector to represent infrastructure that we've currently deemed to be out of scope. So there have been numerous stock-taking initiatives throughout the sector, but these have largely been done in isolation from one another, and we're keenly aware that there's a lot that's been done that we don't really know about. So we're interested in developing ways to link our data set to others to potentially represent GLAMs, tie research projects to research infrastructure through the Gateway to Research portal, and potentially even map out industry partnerships to help enrich our data set and provide a more complete representation of activity in our sector, because it's really only then that we'll be able to kind of draw some firm conclusions about where we've been and hopefully make effective plans for where the sector is going and what we can do to enable it. So this work is still in its proposal stages, but we do think that some form of linking will be possible. I mean, hopefully this all comes through. But if you are aware of any data sets that could be relevant to this endeavor, please do get in touch. We're really interested in collaborating with partners, and we would just really love to hear more about your work. Anyway, I think that's it from me. I think I'm gonna hand over back to Jane, but thank you all so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Megan. And that's generated some really interesting questions, which I will now try to go through. Apologies in advance if we don't get to all of your questions. We will be producing an FAQ on the basis of the things that have come up at this session and the session that we held last week as well. So if we can't answer things today, we will answer them on the project website. The URL for the project is humanities.org.uk, which we hope is a nice, easy one to remember. And as Megan said, we will be getting in touch with all of you to check the data that we have collected so far in the late summer, early autumn, ahead of the launch in November. This is a snapshot of data at a point in time at the moment, and obviously the site relies for its sustainability on currency and accuracy, and that's part of the reason for holding these events, is to try and build a community around this project that will help to ensure that your work is reflected in the best possible way, so that the arts and humanities has a profile through this site. So for the first question, I think this is one for you, Megan. Can a resource be affiliated with UK and non-UK universities?
Yes, it can. It mostly just needs to have some kind of basis of, it needs to kind of have a UK address. That's where we've kind of drawn the line. But we have found numerous things that are basically international collaborations. So we capture those too where we can.
Thank you. Next, how many institutions are involved? You mentioned, Megan, that we've got over 3,000 individual pieces of infrastructure, and we're expecting that to be at around about 4,500 to 5,000 by launch. There are about 100 being added a week at the moment. But how many institutions do you think that represents? That's probably only going to be impressionistic at this point, but how many institutions?
That's an excellent question. I think we're looking at, we draw from this list we have of universities, and I think we've got around 180 listed there. So in terms of academic institutions, that's kind of what we're looking at. But then we also, as we sort of said before, we're covering things like independent research organizations who aren't affiliated directly with an institution. We sometimes find links to other institutions as well that you might not expect. But I'd say around 180 to 200 is about what I'd estimate it to be.
Great, thank you. And I think the second part of that question is probably one for Jo, which is whether we're planning on facilitating any interactions between those organisations and infrastructures apart from online.
No, I think it's a resource for communities to use. So I think we won't be facilitating the connections between them, but I think it's up to individuals or to organisations themselves. Once they're aware that the infrastructure's there, then it's really up to the researchers themselves to take forward those connections.
And we hope that this will throw up possible interactions that you might not have expected previously in your local area and nationally too. The next one, I think, is, I know this is something that you and your team have been talking about, Megan. Your tagging system sounds great. Will you be considering a semantic combining process for some of the user-generated tags so that they can be searched together? For example, if people use sustainability, net zero, and carbon neutral, etc., might these be grouped so a search for sustainability brings up all of these items?
Yeah, so this is something that we're really keen on pursuing. We're still talking to the web developers about how practical it would be. But basically, we want to be able to accommodate everyone to be able to describe their research in the terms that they think are most appropriate. However, at the same time, we don't want that to then have the unfortunate side effect of some hiding that research if someone's not using those exact right keyword. So it is something that we really hope to be able to implement.
Great, thank you. Another question for you, Megan. There's lots of interest in the data coming through in the Q&A. Are virtual resources dealt with in the same way as building-based resources, e.g. for searching on the new site?
By and large, yes. If by virtual you mean, we know that there's a lot of collaborative work going on that's maybe not going on together in the same building. There are lots of things, for example, with learned societies or sometimes subject associations where they don't actually have a physical address. It's more of a kind of virtual grouping. And yes, by and large, we do recognize those and we do record those. What we don't really record at the moment, though, are things like digital resources. We know that those are infrastructure. Since we're digital humanists, we really value them, but they're just a bit, sadly, they're just out of scope at the moment, and also phenomenally, famously, very difficult to record because it's hard to keep track of them.
And it's probably also worth adding, Megan, that we know that the map itself, it's only one view on the data, but not everything can be visualized on the map because not everything has a physical location, and there'll be other ways of interacting with different kinds of infrastructure that don't necessarily have a physical location, but they will be represented in the data too. Right, how much detail will the mapping be able to get into, and how will you keep it up to date? I think we've touched on the keeping up to date already, but the purpose of this question in particular is, will you be using AI to do this?
I don't believe so. I think we're currently in talks about geocoding addresses so that things should be, there should be an accurate positioning on the map in terms of where your infrastructure is located. I don't think we're going to really go further than that, mostly because while this is a mapping exercise, it's a mapping exercise in numerous senses. So there's obviously the geospatial map, the actual map of the UK, but then we're very interested in mapping relationships, as it were, and doing that network graph work. So I think we're trying to cover our bases in terms of what we mean by mapping.
Thank you. The next question is really asking what's an API. So it would be great, Megan, if you could just talk a little bit, not necessarily going into all the technical details of an API, but what that will allow people to do with the data. You touched on it in your presentation, but perhaps you could say a bit more.
Yeah, so an API, that stands for Application Programming Interface. This is something that basically will give you access to the data kind of directly, so that it will take it off of the website, which is very much a kind of curated view on the data. It's the data with an interface, basically, and so it is kind of forcing you to interact with the data in specific ways, in ways that we've considered and that we've designed, and it's designed to make it easy for you. But if you are a data scientist and you just want to see what the raw data is, it can be really infuriating and difficult to get around. So it's a way of basically providing a large-scale data dump for you to be able to play with the data on your own terms. And it's very, very useful for if you want to do any kind of visualization exercise, or if you want to do a data linking exercise, for example, which is what we want to do, or even if you just want to run some basic statistical analysis. It's much easier to get that data in a kind of tabular form, either through a CSV download, which will kind of do the same thing, or maybe have it delivered in JSON, which the API will potentially do. It's easier to deal with it in that way rather than trying to collect the data manually from the way the website has it presented. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Megan. And I think it might also be helpful to add that it's not possible to do really sophisticated visualization in a sustainable way in a web browser. So there'll be some sample visualizations, but to do the really complex stuff and make this project extensible and linked to other data sets that exist already, that's going to be the mechanism for doing this. So we hope it'll be another way of building community around the site, as people can take data away, build their own tools on top of it, that kind of thing. The next question I think we've probably answered, which was about collectives and more network-based projects that are not based in one geolocation and how those will appear or be searchable. But I think sometimes networks, Megan, have a host contact point, which is used for geolocation, but perhaps you could say a bit more about that.
Yes, so for our current day collection purposes, we only record the one address, and it tends to generally be, if the network is based within, say, a center or an institute, it tends to be that address. However, we are aware that that's maybe not always the most accurate address, which is again why we really encourage you to verify your data and correct us when we're wrong. We're also discussing with the web developers the possibility of potentially having a kind of address that indicates where you do your activities, but that might be different from a contact address. And again, we're trying to figure out ways to give you the most flexibility and to represent kind of the range of your activities and how you do your activities.
Thank you. The next question is one I think, Megan, you and your team could probably talk about for hours. It reflects conversations you've already been having. Based on your slides, are the 5 AHRC categories the only ones you have been using to map the research infrastructure? At our institution, humanities and social sciences include music, philosophy, communications and media, management, architecture, amongst other disciplines, falling under the 5 categories shown on the slide. I wonder whether research infrastructure around these disciplines, whose work maps against digital humanities, medical humanities, heritage, transforming conflict, etc., are being or will be captured by the mapping.
So I guess short answer is no, we're not just confining ourselves to those 5 listed there. Those are just kind of listed as examples, just because they're ones that I think we would all generally accept, or yes, that's arts and humanities for sure. But the AHRC tagging set is actually much larger, includes a big variety of things. And even then we have found that yes, there are loads of things outside of even those tags that are relevant to the arts and humanities. And as I said before, we're taking a very kind of inclusive approach to what we're including. So there are some really cool things that we found, like design research groups that are based within sort of arts-based programs at universities that then are doing work with engineering, or doing work with like in medical research, working on design prosthetics. That kind of thing goes in. On the political science side of things, we often find things are discussing policy in various forms, and policy within various different kind of subjects, such as, again, sort of global health and the environment, climate change, social justice, that kind of thing. Basically, we really are trying to take as broad a view as possible, because we think the arts and humanities have that kind of relevance and are relevant to those discussions. So in short, yes, we're trying to include those things where we can find a solid justification for it.
Great, thank you, Megan. And I know from the discussions we've been having in the team, there's some really interesting research we're keen to do about the boundaries and the soft borders and between subjects, how they define themselves, the language used to describe infrastructure, centres, networks, and so on. So we're hoping that we'll also be able to produce some interesting results around that kind of thing, but also the data will allow you to do research in that if you're interested. The next question, we've talked a bit about how the map will be maintained and updated, but specifically, will institutions be given access to edit their own information, and how will that work?
So institutions well, infrastructures certainly will do. Every infrastructure that we record, we will invite them to, create an account on the website so that they can edit their own information. Basically what will happen is, for this first stage, once we finish our data collection and the website is primed and ready to go live, we will be contacting all of you. For every infrastructure we've recorded contact details, so we'll be using those to reach out to you all, to ask you to verify your data, ask you if you're okay with us publishing your data online, and then also inviting you to create an account on the website. You'll be given kind of a special link that will lead you to the website, and then you can create your kind of personal login details there. And basically the idea is that you will be able to log in whenever you would like. to update this information whenever you feel it is pertinent. Or you don't have to log in at all if it's not pertinent and you don't feel like you need to update it. It's really up to you. I'd say about once a year, we will send out an email to everyone reminding them that, oh, your infrastructure is up on here, and if something's changed, it would be good to update it. But that's kind of the level of sort of involvement that you'll get from us on that side. We will kind of gently remind you, but it's really up to you about whether or not you want to update it. But we really, really encourage you to do so that the data set remains relevant.
Great. Lots more data questions, Megan. So I hope you're staying the course. I have a question about how subject associations can engage with this site. My own association, the Society for Latin American Studies, is interdisciplinary. Oops, sorry, my screen just moved there and I lost the question. It's interdisciplinary. So I imagine our members could represent their regional focus through tags. The overlap between ESRC and AHRC subject areas will also be of interest. What are your suggestions when the site is made public?
Yes, well, I'm really happy to say that I know we've got you recorded, so you're definitely part of the data set at the moment. And yes, I would say a great way to kind of represent sort of all of the fields you cover is, again, to really make the most use of those user tags to kind of highlight which specific areas of study you focus on. And again, you can put whatever you want in those user tags. Our project tags, by and large, are going to be primarily focused on traditional kind of arts humanities sort of fields of study, along with new things that we've found that we think are really, really pertinent. But something that we're really interested in tracking is this kind of involvement with the social sciences and indeed with the sciences as well. So really you can put in whatever you want. And if it's more of a social science topic, put that in the user tag. And if we find that that's being really, really productive, that will end up coming into the tags as well, which would be really, really interesting. Another way for you to kind of represent the variety of your research is just really edit the description for your infrastructure to make sure that's highlighting those things, because something that the search will be doing is it will be searching not just the names and tags connected to infrastructure, but it will also be searching the descriptions for keywords. So I would say just really make sure that your description is doing the most work it can to kind of advertise what it is that you do.
Thank you. I think perhaps I'll take the next question, give Megan a little breather, which is, what is the duration of project funding, i.e. what is the sustainability of the website and updating it in the long term? Megan mentioned that the current phase of funding, this establishment phase, finishes in November. But the School of Advanced Study will be maintaining the website post that launch period as part of its remit to promote and facilitate arts and humanities research in the UK. And the sustainability of the content is where we're in your hands. It's as sustainable as the community engagement around it. And we hope that we'll be able to demonstrate that it's of sufficient value that it's worth investing your time to keep the information up to date and help us to do that, although obviously we know you are very busy people.
I would also just add that it's been designed in such a way so that it's designed to be as sustainable as possible. So we've again designed the website to be quite lightweight, so it will run well. It's been designed using a lot of open source technologies as well, so that it's quite portable. And again, it's kind of been designed to run with relatively limited, I would say, well, it's not a very needy site. You don't necessarily need to have tons of administrators kind of keeping an eye on it. We're trying to create a process that is streamlined, lightweight, and again, means that you can get your information up on the site very quickly.
Thank you, Megan. The next one is a very specific data management question. How will you ensure only trusted contacts can register and help update the relevant pages? And I know you've been thinking a lot about this within your team as well.
So there will be an approval process for everyone who registers. When we initially reach out to you, that approval process will basically already have been done, because we will have identified you as connected to the infrastructure through the data collection research that we've done. You will only be given access to a specific data record, or if you are in charge of multiple infrastructure, which some people are, you will have access to all of those infrastructure, but you won't have access to anything that we've not identified you as being linked to. So you'll need to go through that approval process. For later on, when people add their own infrastructure, when people, you know, apply to kind of join the project, there will be a lightweight approval process again. Generally, if they have a university email address, we're counting that as being sort of part of being identified as being a legitimate user. However, again, we know some people won't have a university website, well, university email address, sorry. But we will have an administrator on hand to kind of help with that approval process as well, if there's any difficulty there.
Great, thank you. The next question, I think, has a very quick answer. Will there be a link, logo, tab, etc., that we can embed on our websites to say that we are part of this mapping project, and to enable users of our websites to access the project and see the whole mapping exercise? Megan is nodding because the answer is yes. Actually, it's a very helpful suggestion. We hadn't been thinking in particular about a logo or widget rather than just a link, but that's definitely something that we can also think about to make it as easy as possible for you to share the information and that you've been included in the project. The next question, does the project envisage the development of any tools to grasp transnational connections or the transnational nature of some of these UK-based infrastructures?
I think it's something that we'd be really interested in doing, but I think it's not necessarily something that can immediately be done now. We certainly are interested in hearing more about how other countries structure their research, about international links. I think that's really, really exciting stuff to look into. And it's something that hopefully might become more possible, especially after we play around with data linking and we, you know, collaborate with more people. So I'd say it's an interesting idea, but we need to get through a few steps first.
Thank you. And it might also be worth mentioning that there are similar activities happening in other countries outside the UK, and we've been in discussion with some of those to talk about how that all links up as well, so that we can start to represent international and transnational connections, whether that's through data linkage rather than directly on the site, but it's definitely something that we're aware of. So the next question, which again is the kind of thing that I know exercises your team a lot, Megan, what disciplinary affiliations would be assigned to a group like the Association of Adaptation Studies and other similar groups examining intermediality, intertextuality, etc., across disciplines?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, we'd have a whole discussion about that in the data team. Basically, it really depends on how the information is presented on the website. We're very much limited by what information is there. Sometimes we will dig a bit deeper to see what members of staff kind of do. So if you have someone who's working kind of in English literature, but then also something who's working in film studies, someone working in art history, those would all be potential tags that we would list there to try and capture the interdisciplinary kind of nature of what it is that you're doing. There is an AHRC tag for adaptation, but that is again very much nested within language and literature, which again, if you're trying to be interdisciplinary, it kind of defeats the purpose. So I think that's kind of the way we'd probably approach it. We'd use that initial more specific tag about adaptation, and then we'd also list those other disciplines that we identified either through the copy on your website in the description or through what your members specialize in. And then for the project tags, we would then maybe suggest something on a tag along the lines such as adaptation studies and that kind of thing. That would be our initial stab at the tagging. But again, when we send it to you for verification, you can undo all of that if you like. If you feel like, no, you've completely got it wrong, that is not what we do. We do this and this, and then add in as many user tags as you think are appropriate to properly kind of represent what you do.
Great, thank you. How much technical knowledge will we need to make meaningful queries is the next question.
You won't need much technical knowledge at all, I don't think. I mean, it's a lot like using any kind of database on the web, really, or like using the Gateway to Research sort of portal or infra portal, where you should be able to do simple keyword queries, kind of a bit like Google, really. If you wanted to do kind of much more complicated stuff to do with partnerships, you might then maybe need to go to the API to start seeing who's partnered with who and who's the child of this or that. But that's something that we can also kind of talk about a bit more with the web developers to see how much of that is queryable.
Thank you. We've still got quite a lot of questions in the Q&A and only 2 minutes left. So I think we can maybe finish up with one very quickly, because I know, again, this is something that you've been talking about a lot in your team. What percentage of the research infrastructure covered by the mapping would you say belongs to the subject of political science? Is political science a core subject of the mapping, or the infrastructure concerns mostly political science topics that are in some way related to arts and humanities?
Yeah, so that's been quite a shocker in a way, because it is a large percentage. And actually, if you don't mind, I might scroll back through my slides to see, we can look at the pie chart together. Yeah, political is just, in terms of the percentage, it's just under history. So it's quite massive. But I would say that political science has probably been the one that's caused us the most grief in terms of how to collect it and its position in the arts and humanities. Because on the one hand, I'm very, very much convinced that it is a humanities-based subject, but it's one that is also obviously very relevant to social sciences as well. So a lot of what we've collected is very much on that border between the two, especially when it comes to things like policy and kind of measuring political decisions in action and their result on things. Again, I still think that's incredibly important to the humanities for understanding, you know, how these decisions are made, what's the kind of effect of those decisions. So again, it's just an interesting kind of reflection on the division between the arts, humanities and the social sciences, and whether or not that division is always really useful, or actually do the two have a lot to kind of share with one another and to say to one another.
Great. Thank you very much, Megan, and thanks to all of you for such wonderful questions at this late stage in the afternoon. We've very much enjoyed discussing this with you. Look out for some contact from us in the late summer to update your data. But in the meantime, if you've got any questions, comments, ideas, you know, about databases we should be connecting to, please do get in touch with us. We would love to hear from you. And thank you again, everybody.